Welcome everybody to our conversation with Dr. Joan Rosenberg, our very special guest today. And we're going to be discussing a subject that we are all intimately involved with day in and day out, and that's our human emotions. And Dr. Rosenberg is going to tell us about how we can engage with our emotions constructively and how do we come face to face with the more difficult ones, which growing up very often we're not taught how to engage with and we tend to avoid them. So that's going to be a topic of our discussion. And Dr. Rosenberg is a best-selling author, speaker, consultant. She's been featured on critically acclaimed documentaries like I Am. She has a vast and diverse practice of over 35 years as a clinical psychologist. And with this vast body of work, she's come up with a very unique formula to work with difficult emotions, fondly nicknamed as the Rosenberg Reset. And today we're going to go deep into that formula and really explore different questions about the formula. We'll get curious about it. And just to set the stage, so the formula is that, when we experience strong, unpleasant and uncomfortable emotions, not bad emotions, but unpleasant and uncomfortable emotions like sadness, shame, anger, frustration, vulnerability, embarrassment, disappointment and frustration, rather than avoiding them, we come face to face with them and move into a space of acceptance. And the formula is one choice, which is the choice to stay present and in touch with our moment-to-moment experience with the emotion, or these 8 feelings. We use the word interchangeably, feelings and emotions here. And that these emotions actually last for 60 to 90 seconds. And so the knowledge that they will pass away. So yeah, setting the context there, Dr. Rosenberg, warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Sure. So, your formula is, I think, a very powerful tool because there are so many instances in our life, personal and professional, where we're just taken over by these emotions, and then very often we get swayed by those emotions instead of engaging with them. And your formula helps us really get constructive with it. One question, in my mind is that, what do we do during those 90 seconds? How do we stay present with the emotions? Is it, do we observe how we're feeling in the body, or if we're comfortable engaging with it at a thought level? Would you say we engage at a thought level? What would you recommend?
Well, I wonder if you mind if I deepen the conversation around the reset first and then answer that question. Would that be all right?
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. So, and let me, if I may, let me also set a little bit of a context in terms of like why this reset anyway. So the reality is, when I was young and started out in life, I was quite the shy, sensitive child. And oftentimes in my early childhood, and again, this went through childhood and into adolescence, I felt like I didn't fit in or I didn't belong. And I would look over at my peers and kind of, watch this group hanging out off to my side, not feeling like I said, not feeling like I fit in. And it was like, how, I don't have what they have, right? They seemed so confident, they were laughing, the whole thing. And it was like, so the first question that I wrestled with early on was, how do I develop confidence? Because at that time, I surely didn't have it, right? So, and then as I got into my professional life, and as a psychologist, what ended up happening is I became so aware that, as much as the way we think or what we think can get in our way, I found that a person's difficulty handling unpleasant feelings was that much harder. And then over time, so that I was like, the second question for me then as a professional was, how does somebody deal more effectively with unpleasant feelings? And what's interesting to me is it turns out that the answer to that second question about dealing with unpleasant feelings actually answers the first question about confidence. So it's when you handle unpleasant feelings, it has a big impact on confidence. So I'll circle back to that, but I want you to have the context, because I think that makes a big difference in kind of understanding what may unfold in our conversation. So that's the first thing. So what's the deal with the reset? So a colleague of mine kind of affectionately called it the Rosenberg Reset. And it was like, okay, that sticks, I'll work. I mean, it works, that sticks, I'll use it. And so what the reset, as you clearly articulated, is this idea of, it's a kind of in a formula. So it's one choice, 8 feelings, 90 seconds. And it's like, okay, but what the heck does that mean? Well, the one choice is that we choose into awareness, that we choose to stay present to what we're experiencing, as opposed to do everything we can to avoid it. And we can avoid it through reasoning, we can avoid it through substance use, we can avoid it through shopping, we can avoid it through, men might avoid it through pornography. I mean, social media, the amount of time spent on screens. So I think, I have this information outlined in a book, and I think I outline roughly 35 different ways for people to distract. So we're talking, I don't want avoidance. That's not going to serve you. So that one choice is awareness as opposed to avoidance. So choose awareness. The second part of it are 8 feelings. And the 8 feelings are sadness, again, just briefly, sadness, shame, helplessness, anger, vulnerability, embarrassment, disappointment, and frustration. And the first question that comes up for me is like, why the heck these 8? And it's these 8 because they're the most common, everyday, spontaneous reactions to things not turning out the way we perceive we need or the way we want. So, and we can talk later about why other feelings aren't there, but that's the kind of key focus around it, is that it's the everydayness of the feeling. And just because it's so common, and on any given day, any given week, we're bound to have moved through one or more of those feelings.
Right.
And then the 90 seconds, what's the deal with the 90 seconds? Well, it turns out that the 90 seconds is the method, if you will, for handling the unpleasant feelings. But and as you so clearly articulated, it's not negative and it's not bad, because our feelings are there for protection. So I call them unpleasant or uncomfortable. And my encouragement is that you do the same, because I think it'll change your relationship to them. And so the 90 seconds is about understanding that most of us, for the great many of us, we will come to know what we are feeling by how we experience it in our body. And so that it's understanding that when a feeling gets triggered, there's this rush of biochemicals that run through our bloodstream and that activate bodily sensations. So the easiest to think about is embarrassment, that you can feel the heat at your chest or your neck or your face, and then somebody else might see redness, but you can feel the heat. The heat is the bodily sensation. And then there's other likely sensations for other feelings. And so the notion is that those biochemicals actually activate that embarrassing kind of bodily sensation. And then those same biochemicals flush out of the bloodstream in roughly 90 seconds. Now, I didn't make that up. It was an observation by Dr. Jill Bolte-Taylor. But what it did is it allowed me to understand a way to help people move into the feeling and towards the feeling. So the key then is understanding that in order to lean into and embrace or stay present to your unpleasant feelings, it means riding, if you will, or surfing one or more short-lived bodily sensation waves. And if you can ride those bodily sensation waves, then you should be able to stay present to the feeling and then work with it. So I just want to kind of deepen our understanding around that, if that's all right.
Sure.
And then to the other part of your question, it's like, so what do we do with it when it's there? And we were talking about mindfulness before the interview started. Is the first thing is notice, just stay present, notice what's taking place. And the first thing I would have you do is actually take a deep breath, or deep, slow breaths. Because when you swallow or you don't breathe, you're actually shutting down the feeling. So the first thing to do is, once you notice that you're starting to experiencing something, or you're having a reaction, is take some deep breaths, stay present to what's happening in your body, and then see if you can't name what's taking place. So maybe it's sadness, maybe it's disappointment, maybe it's frustration. I don't know what it'll be. But, and if it were the redness here, I'd probably name embarrassment. And so then you just notice, give it a name if you can. And then once you name it, while you're still doing kind of some deep breathing, then the thing to do is to engage with your thinking mind and say, I wonder what triggered this. What is this connected to? So that you make that link and association. And then it's like, all right, okay, I've got that. And now it's, is there anything that I need to do with this feeling? So the three things I often talk about are that you can use those feelings and your reasoning mind to make a decision, or you can use it for expressing yourself, or you can use it to take some kind of an action. And the other thing, if you have more time and you want to engage even more fully, then it might be noticing whether there was a pattern to you having this reaction at a given time, or if it's associated with other memories. So there's a variety of things that you can do after it. The most common, again, is just kind of breathing into it, naming it, identifying what it's connected to or what triggered it, and then to see how you want to make use of it after.
That helps. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
A related question, Dr. Rosenberg, is that there are these instances, and I've experienced it myself, is when as women and as leaders and in the corporate space, there are certain instances, certain things that are said, or we may be a part of meetings which really hit us. Like there's a very strong emotion, but the setting is such where till we get acquainted with the reset formula, we may not be very sure whether we're ready to engage with it at that point, for two reasons. One is that we may either feel like tearing up at that point of time, but there are like people around, or we have to, in addition to engaging with ourselves, engage with others and respond to something serious that has been said or is being asked of us. So in those cases, what do you suggest? Do we put it on hold and then come back to it, or how do we still hold ourselves together and handle it in a healthy way?
Well, the holding yourself together, I think, is, for me, holding yourself together is not through shutting down. So that's not what I would advocate. And so that I have a variety of different reactions to the question, and it's such an important question. So I have two kind of context responses to it, because the one aspect of it is from a broader cultural level, what's acceptable. And then the second part of that is, what is the culture of the work environment? So we're talking about a minimum of two different cultures intersecting in terms of whatever's in quotes considered acceptable with those two intersecting cultures, right?
Yes.
So I can't ignore the kind of the broader mores, if you will, or the mores and customs of both your culture as well as the environment and culture of the workspace. But but here's also some of my deeper thinking around that, and that is that cultural workspace is not going to change if we're inauthentic. And the truth is that if you're having a given reaction in a meeting, then it's quite likely that other people are experiencing something parallel to that. So same thing, the first thing I would want people to do is be aware that you're being affected. And if you're willing to be more vulnerable and to show that you were affected, even if your voice starts to waver a little bit as you say what you might be hesitant to say, or your cheeks get red, or your breath changes, or you become a little bit tearful, then what people understand is that you're being impacted, right? And so my thing is, you can actually make use of the feeling, not to be afraid of it, but go, all right, I'm gonna put myself out there, and then you say what you need to say, and allow yourself to in this case, you're kind of using the emotion to help you express yourself. And so if it's acceptable to do, and even if it's not acceptable to do that, this is sometimes how environments change, because what some of what's happening is we're all being asked to be less human than what we really are in those settings. And so the invitation is to be a little bit more authentic. And when you allow yourself to be authentic, that, to me, that's an act of courage, and it's also an act of leadership. So that others might be hesitant and go, whoa, didn't expect that. But now it's on the table with something to work with. And I want to provide an example here because it's coming to mind.
Sure.
You're probably aware of all the different kinds of things taking place in the States, and
Yes.
after the death of the very raw death of George Floyd, and there's been many. I teach in a university, and there've been many conversations, and deep conversations, because there were Black students, if you will, that were calling out the white professors. And I ended up, which again, it's the rawness. It's trying to work out these conversations and make more sense of what's happening. And I ended up being one of the handful of people, of Caucasian professors in this case, that spoke up. But as I started to speak, and I'd already spoken twice before, I was just moved to tears in the process of what I was trying to convey. And for me, it's understanding that I made no effort to hide those tears. This is me being raw and human and authentic in the moment, and then saying what I felt needed to be said from whatever that particular point was. And what's interesting is it was met by both students and other faculty members with appreciation. So I only share the example because sometimes we have to be willing to actually use the emotion that we're experiencing to actually help strengthen the point we're trying to make. So it's not something to hide, it's actually something you can make use of.
Thank you for sharing. That was a very powerful example.
Absolutely.
So from like you said, cultural perspective, and also how we've been evolving. Like now we are more open to speaking about vulnerability compared to how it was not spoken about that much maybe a decade back.
Yes, that's right.
So growing up, very, very often we were either taught or we just formulated avoidance as a way to manage emotions.
Right. Yep.
And so often what happens is that if there is this an embarrassing situation which we don't want to think about, and so it's not processed, it stays within, and then there is a trigger, it plays back again, and we go through. So instead of staying with it for 90 seconds once, we go through it multiple times, maybe longer than 90 seconds. What do we do with those which, keep playing in a loop? What's a good way to work with those?
Well, again, I'm hearing your question at two different levels. Well, one is specific to vulnerability. The other is a response to unpleasant feelings more generally. So what I hear when you're talking about getting into that thinking loop is that somebody is being harshly self-critical. That they're replaying that loop, but it's not a friendly replay.
Yes.
Right? It's kind of a mean replay. Like, it's like, what did I do that for? How come I said that? God, that was so stupid. Or there's some kind of loop like that that's going. So let me answer the vulnerability part of it first. For me, starting to get into those questions is the hallmark of vulnerability. So I associate two feelings together mostly. One is the experience of being vulnerable, which is this notion. It's actually more of a kind of a feeling state than a pure feeling, but it's the notion that I could get hurt, the sense I could get hurt. So that's how I think about vulnerability. One of the ways I think about vulnerability. And so here I am feeling vulnerable. I've said this thing, and now in my head, I've left the situation. I'm thinking about it, and it's like, and now I'm going through that loop that you're talking about, the thought loop. And so for me, it's understanding that what that thought loop is suggesting is that I feel a little embarrassed. But I'm not allowing myself to be in the embarrassment of the vulnerability. Instead, I'm beating myself up for having taken the risk. So when I move to the act of being harsh to myself, harsh self-criticism, then what I'm doing is I'm distracting from unpleasant feelings. So, which gets me to the second part of it. So the first part of it is vulnerability and embarrassment go together. And when you're into that critiquing, all it is a reflection that you're feeling vulnerable. That's it. You're probably feeling vulnerable and embarrassed. The thing to do is just bring yourself back and go, I took the risk. I feel vulnerable and embarrassed. Like, done. That's the hallmark of vulnerability, is to feel that
acceptance.
Yeah, it's just, oh, got it. But the other part of this, which is this, for me, that second level of hearing your question, is that in general, whether it relates to vulnerability or something else, it is understanding that the way I view harsh self-criticism is that it's a distraction from the 8 unpleasant feelings. So anytime you're engaged in harsh self-criticism and any of those kind of thought loops, you're distracting from some kind of an unpleasant feeling. And the thing to do is to go right back to the 8. Now that's a little bit of a challenge. I'm challenging a paradigm here, or challenging a way to think through things. But I believe very, very strongly that harsh self-criticism or negative self-talk is simply a distraction from the 8 unpleasant feelings.
Now, could there be situations where there are more than one unpleasant feelings, and then would it take longer than 90 seconds to?
No. In fact, so again, the idea here is to think one or more bodily sensation waves. So it's not necessarily one wave that you're going to experience. So understand it might be one or more. Yes, feelings can come in groups. It's rare that you'll experience all 8 at the same time. But you could experience something that was very sad and also something that was very relieving at the same time, right? So that you're actually a little bit more at peace because something's complete or whatever it might be. And yes, you can feel sad and angry and disappointed all at the same time. That for me, those feelings in particular are reflective of grief. And I think that they do kind of come in a bundle. They can be alone. So just feeling sadness, just feeling anger, just feeling disappointment, possibly even just feeling helplessness. Any one of those on their own could be an experience of grief. And certainly all four of them together could be the experience of grief. So yes, some feelings come more, and I would say with more intensity, then there's likely to be more waves, but they will settle. Part, to your point earlier, part of what seems to drive this quality of lingering feelings is that I keep this thought loop going. I keep on repeating the thought, or I keep on repeating the memory, and as a result, it keeps activating that same physical sensation.
Right. And speaking about other difficult feelings,
Yes.
yeah, I'll use the word emotions interchangeably, like
Sure. Yep.
fear or guilt. So how do we, are those related to these primary 8 ones? And it must have been tough to choose just 8.
Well, there's reasons why I didn't put fear, and there's also reasons why I didn't put anxiety. I also explain it more deeply in the book, but very briefly here. So here's the reasoning behind it. Psychology broadly defines fear as danger in the moment right now. So if there's no danger in the moment right now, and you have food, you have shelter, you have friends, you have finances, you're basically safe, or there's no lion and tiger running after you, or nobody's threatening your life in any way, then you're not in danger. So if you're not in danger, my thing is, don't use the word fear. Let's save it for when you're genuinely in danger. And that those are the old, so in my mind, people overuse and misuse the words fear and anxiety all of the time. I don't use the language of fear, not unless it's associated with something dangerous or life-threatening. And do I want somebody to be fearful then? Yeah, because that's the stress response. So if you're in danger, have fear, have at it, right? It's not, then absolutely use the word, because that's legitimate for what you're going through. But most times when people use the word, they're not anywhere in those states, right? So the first thing is, stop using the word fear if you're not in danger in the moment right now, period, right? Because how we language things affects how we feel them, right? Yes. So that's the first thing. The second one is with anxiety. Now, and again, from psychology's point of view, anxiety is this idea of, the bigger word is diffuse apprehension or diffuse concern, if you will, over something, a bad event that might take place in the future. And it's diffuse apprehension over an aversive event in the future. So a broad-based concern that something bad is going to happen in the future is another way to think about that. And so again, does that fit better? It fits. Actually, it's a way more accurate. Except my experience with people using the word anxiety is that if I were to ask 10 people what anxiety meant to them, I would get 10 different answers. So from my perspective, it's way too vague, and it kind of leaves it up here where I can't really grasp onto it and really make sense of it. So my thing is, stop using the word anxiety. The next most logical one is the one of feeling vulnerable. Like in this time, globally, most of us feel kind of vulnerable. We don't know when this insidious virus is going to stop and or land or whatever, right? So that's confusing and difficult, and we're feeling like we could get hurt legitimately. Mm-hmm. So now we have that sense of vulnerability that we're experiencing, way more accurate. And it's interesting because when you use the word, you actually calm down. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Did you have the reaction as I said it?
Yes.
Yeah, it shifts it, right? Yes. It's more accurate. So that, and if it's not the anxiety, then in my experience, it's one or more of the other 7 feelings that are left. So then so when you're feeling anxious, check first to see if you're feeling vulnerable. And then if it's not vulnerability, then check and see if the other one or more of the other 7 feelings are present, and let yourself lean into that. The anxiety will dissipate.
Yes.
So that's why not fear and why not anxiety. So I spent a lot of time thinking about that. Guilt is another beast entirely. And if you look at the way some people talk about guilt, they talk about it as a move towards independent action. So what does that mean? It means that if I break it down more friendly, it means that you have a mind of your own and I have a mind of my own, and they may not match. So for instance, let's say your family members wanted you to come for a special holiday, and you and your immediate family went, no, we have other plans. And then what do you hear from your parents? They say, what? How come you're not coming? And all these kind of reactions to kind of, in quotes, induce guilt. What's ending up happening is, rather than just looking at you and saying, well, that's disappointing, or I feel disappointed,
Yes.
what they do is it comes across as a judgment from someone else. In this case, it's activating a judgment that you're taking your bad action, but it's not necessarily bad action. It just so happens that you have a mind of your own and they have a mind of their own, and they're not matching up right now.
Right.
But they're also not being clean and clear about how they're expressing it to you. And as a result, it's kind of, in quotes, inducing guilt. And so your guilt is actually, in my mind, is not a feeling. So I don't think of guilt as a feeling. So even when people say, I feel guilty, in my head, I go, nope, you're thinking guilty. You're not feeling guilty, because guilt is a judgment against yourself for allegedly, if you will, having a mind of your own. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
So that's why I didn't include guilt.
And tell us more about your book, 90 Seconds to the Life You Love.
Sure. And I'm not sure, I know that we talked a little bit about expressing ourselves too, so I don't know if you want to get back to that piece as well. The book, the 90 Seconds to a Life You Love, at least the title in the subtitle in the United States is How to Master Your Difficult Feelings to Cultivate Lasting Confidence, Resilience, and Authenticity. And I wrote it. It's a deeper, far deeper explanation of not only the reset, but how important and how central it is that I believe dealing with these 8 feelings and being able to experience and move through them, actually to experience and to express them, is crucial for confidence, resilience, and living a much more authentic life. And we again, in our briefer conversation, we were talking about kind of how do you get somebody excited about unpleasant feelings, and for me, it's understanding. When you have an understanding of how simple, how simple the formula is, and the impact of you being able to experience and express yourself because you're able to handle these 8 unpleasant feelings, I think 2 things happen. One is you feel tremendously liberated, because now you feel emotionally strong inside, much more capable in the world. And the second thing is, because you're able to express yourself, in my mind, you now have limitless opportunity. So you don't know what will become available to you because you're able to speak up and say the things you want to say. So for me, how do you get excited about them? You just have to understand how unbelievably liberating they are, and what it opens to you in terms of what it opens up in your world. And then the other part is really understanding that being able to deal with these 8 feelings is really the base of confidence, resilience, and living an authentic life.
And that's a very important point, because when we, as a coach, I'm very excited about people exploring their potential, and very often what stops them is probably the thought, like, I'm just putting it in my own words, each one may put them differently, but sometimes we don't feel equipped to really work with the emotional outcome of pursuing the potential, which is like, I may feel embarrassed if I fail at this. Um, and like we were discussing, that there are no tigers now, but uh, the tigers have been replaced by these psychological outcomes, that, oh, what if
Right.
this doesn't work? So when, like you said, when one can move through these, or one feels that, I can move through these 8 emotions, it's okay. One feels more equipped to really pursue
Agree.
whatever it is.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes, that's exactly right. That's again, I think I outline, basically I outline 6 to 8 ways to be able to develop confidence, and it is developed. Resilience can be learned as well, so that's the great news. And yes, you nailed the point. That's exactly right. The moment we have the awareness that we can experience and move through those 8 feelings, no matter when they happen. I want to learn a new skill. I want to ask my boss for a raise. I want to speak up in a meeting. I want to tell somebody I love them. I want to tell somebody that I really care about them and want to spend more time with them. It doesn't matter which direction, pleasant or unpleasant, because when we put ourselves in those vulnerable positions, then that means we're putting ourselves, in quotes, at risk of experiencing one or more of the other 7 feelings as the outcome. So, but that's the key, to choose into vulnerability, which in my mind is our greatest strength. When we choose into it, then it's going into whatever you do with an understanding that the emotional outcome is likely to be one or more of the other 7 feelings. And if you already know in your mind that I got this, then it doesn't matter how many times you get frustrated. It doesn't matter how many times the mistakes get made. It doesn't matter how many times you experienced, in quotes, what somebody might call a failure, because you disappoint your way to success. That's how we all do it. There isn't any one of us, one that succeeds alone, nor succeeds without having to persevere and move through things that are disappointing or frustrating to us, or angering, or whatever it might be. So the key is really understanding that in fact, the premise of the book really is, if you can ride one or more short-lived bodily sensation waves of one or more of 8 unpleasant feelings, then you can go pursue anything you want in life. And it's because you already got it that you can handle the feeling before you even go into it. And that's the key. Then you become unstoppable.
And now I think you've got me excited about these 8 difficult feelings, and I'm wondering whether avoidance is tougher than awareness, because when you avoid, then you can't escape these, because I think as human beings we are
Right.
designed to go through these feelings.
Yes.
So in your vast experience over 35 years,
Yep.
you would have, what do you think about this thought that I just came up with, which is that, can you really avoid them, and is avoiding more painful than awareness, because then it comes multiple times, and
Yeah.
by
Well,
design.
yeah, no, you can't really avoid them. Ultimately, what people try to do is that it's like they try to compartmentalize it and go, I'm not going to think about that. But that doesn't work. In fact, the more we try not to think about something, the more we think about it. So and the more we avoid, the more we set ourselves up with other problems. So it shows up as bodily complaints. It shows up as increased anxiety. It shows up as, even though I don't use the word, it shows up as people will describe increased anxiety. It'll show up as increased vulnerability. It'll show up as a drinking problem or some other kind of substance abuse problem. It'll show up as a debt problem. It'll show up all sorts of other ways. It'll show up as an eating disorder. So it doesn't matter it does matter that you try to shut it down, because shutting it down not only leaves you saddled with the experience internally Now you're also saddled with the fact that you're trying to use extra energy, thought energy, to keep it suppressed and out of awareness. And then you're engaged in all sorts of actions that then are more damaging. So we've got layers of problems taking place, as opposed to you just going, all right, that was disappointing. What do I need to do to deal with this? And maybe I have to say something to my father that feels really uncomfortable, or maybe I have to say something to my husband or wife that feels really uncomfortable, or whatever it might be. But it's getting used to that. And the more you're able to do that, the more liberated you feel, the deeper, not only do you have a connection to yourself, the deeper you have connections with other people.
Yes. And I think that's beautiful what you said, our relationship with ourselves.
That's the first thing. Yeah.
Yes. Two things that I see helping me engage with my emotions, even through the reset, like easy adoption of the reset
Yes.
were journaling and meditation. I just felt that I think that that has improved my relationship with myself, and that made it easier for me to grow into what you've taught. Have you seen something similar in your practice? Like, what are some ways or daily habits which help?
Yeah,
Um,
well, right. Anything that encourages some kind of reflection on your own experience is going to be very, very growthful. So, yes. So, is journaling great? Yes. Is meditation great? Yes, because both of those put you in a state where you can have the awareness. You can notice what you're noticing, or you can have the awareness of your own awareness. And the moment you can do that is your moment of even more profound growth. So it's not just the awareness itself that you have, it's your awareness of your awareness that creates the growth. Or it's not that you're just noticing something. It's not that you're just noticing your bodily sensation. The fact that you're noticing is where the growth occurs. So yes, any activity that promotes that is great. So whether it's journaling, whether it's meditation, somebody can use exercise for that, as long as, again, that they use it in a reflective way. The people use guided meditations. Somebody could engage in playing music or something like that, and that becomes its own kind of meditative or reflective experience. So that then becomes unique to the individual, but the idea here is that one allows them to reflect on their own individual experience and expression of feeling.
your work sits so well with mindfulness. Is that
Yes.
coincidental?
Well, you know what? It's very interesting. I actually I did the work outside of reviewing mindfulness material. So I've been told that my work is very similar to dialectical behavior therapy. It's very similar to ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, and it's very similar to mindfulness. And the truth of the matter is that I actually intentionally would not read that information, even though I knew it would ground me in other concepts and perhaps even deepen some of the way I discussed it in the 90 Seconds book. But I actually wanted to do it without influencing. This came out of my own work, and I wanted to do that in the absence of the influence of those other writings. So the beauty of it is I can now go back, and I know there's intersections, but because of just my growth and understanding throughout psychology over the years, so I know that there are those intersections. I didn't want the work to be so heavily influenced that it would stop appearing that it was its own work. So yes, I'm aware of the intersections, and no, I didn't study those to write the work.
And when you when you came across this the set of three magical elements, choice,
Yeah.
8 feelings,
Yes.
90 seconds,
Yes.
how did that happen?
Well, the 8 feelings came first. Actually, it probably started, I remember in earlier years, it started as 5 feelings, and then it went to 6, and then it went to 7, and eventually I put down 8. It could legitimately be 7 at more clearly in the absence of frustration, because I think of frustration as either a combination of sadness and anger or disappointment and anger. So I think frustration is kind of a blended one. So if we're feeling either sadness, disappointment, or anger, then we're at some level we could say we're frustrated. So that it grew from roughly 5 feelings to 8 over a number of years. Then again, the big question in my mind was, excuse me, the big question in my mind was, what makes it so hard for people to experience these feelings or to deal with these feelings? And it wasn't until the literally the late 1990s, so we're talking 1999 and into the early 2000s, when all the neuroscience writings started to flourish more. And it was at that point there was much clearer discussion of how we experience feelings in our body first, or that's how we come to know what we're feeling. And then secondarily, the piece when I learned about Dr. Bolte Taylor's work at the 90-second piece, her observation about the 90 seconds, that kind of sealed that part of it. And what's interesting to me about that is that for years in the early 1990s, I was telling people to ride the waves. So intuitively, I was saying the right thing, but I didn't have the more technical explanation, the more scientifically grounded explanation for why it was that worked. And the kind of the other piece of it, actually, what probably preceded it all, was that and I mentioned this in the book, but the diagram isn't anywhere. I drew a diagram in probably 1992 or somewhere between 1992 and 94. So it's a while ago. And that diagram, on one side was avoidance and on the other side was awareness. And I literally had a sequence where where on one side you would walk down to now what I describe as soulful depression. And so that would be the path of avoidance. And on the other side was the path to confidence and aliveness and well-being and the whole thing. So inner peace, contentment, etc. So that drawing, the awareness as opposed to avoidance, was probably the first thing. The 8 feelings was the second, and then putting it all together, it happened once the neuroscience findings were more clearly described.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. That was incredible.
Sure. It's a work over time.
Yes, and it's amazing how it's all come together and it's helping so many people.
Yeah.
I had a question about those who suffer abuse. Like, how can they rebuild themselves? Mental abuse, physical, emotional abuse, and how do they build self-esteem? What would you say for them?
Well, again, part of it's a great question. And in fact, there's one chapter in the book called "Moving Through Grief." And for me, it's actually what I would want someone to do is to take the time to understand the impact and meaning that those life experiences had on them. And it means probably dealing with feelings that have been kind of quieted or compartmentalized or shut down. It's what I call disguised grief. It means dealing with that disguised grief, so sadness, helplessness, anger, disappointment, about what you experienced when you were younger, but it's understanding that you were neither the cause of it. It wasn't about you. It's that you were impacted by it. And I think once you make sense of how you were impacted, there's a process that I walk people through in that chapter 8, or the second TED Talk, if people want to watch the second TED Talk that I did, that helps them begin to use that process to make sense of what they've been through. So it's quite possible to move through it. Again, for some, there's going to be trauma attached to it, and so that may, again, it may take a little bit more time. That's okay. Give yourself the time. Allow yourself to understand how you were impacted, and allow the feelings that you have about the fact that you were impacted that way to be present, and understand that if you're still holding on to what happened then, and seeing yourself in that light from when you were very young, then it's time to allow yourself to kind of let go of that old life story and now begin to live into a new life story. But for me, that happens once you allow yourself to make, and here's the key, it's make sense of the impact that those life experiences had on you. And here's the other key to it: across time. When it happened, as you aged, and right now. So that you want to make sense of that impact and meaning across time.
And does it help to, now the thing is that at different point of time, we may assign a different meaning, and it's totally up to us to attach. We can attach empowering meanings. Could be learning, could be who we became.
Well, there's one piece of the process. So there's 5 steps to it. And one piece of the process is actually to extract what I call kind of extracting the good, or extracting the positive learnings from it. But you don't get to that step until you make sense of the impact it had on you. So yes. So that for me, that's there's some deeper work that's being done at that point, but it's totally possible to do. And I've had people respond, even though it's a little bit of challenging emotional work. I've had people respond very favorably to that process, and finding it very, very useful. And the other element here in relation to your question, so one piece of it is doing kind of the work that's tied to disguised grief, what we were just talking about, the impact and meaning across time. And the other part of it is understanding that that the way you develop, that's not the way you develop confidence. That's an aspect of it. And I would say it's, for me, it's a little bit more of it gets us to kind of a finishing touch kind of thing, because you're doing the even deeper work that's related. But the other key things, the foundation of having confidence, I will tell you and repeat over and over, and I'm convinced of it, is that it's that your capacity to experience and express those 8 unpleasant feelings. That's the foundational piece. And then it has to do with you being able to take action and to speak up and stop your harsh self-criticism and deal with compliments more effectively. There's a whole mix of things that, for me, that becomes the formula, if you will, a bigger formula for being able to develop that confidence and resilience. And so there's more elements involved in that, and because it gets at not only how we experience and express feeling, it also gets at how and what we think. So that's another couple elements that are woven into this, but it's very possible. So and it works.
There's another amazing book that you've written on anxiety, which I'm yet to get my hands on, but would love to know more about that book, because anxiety has been a familiar place for me in the past, and
let's put it in the past. Yeah.
And I come across, many wonderful people who are working their way through anxiety, and I think insights on the book would really help them. So if you could tell us.
Yeah, the book is called Ease Your Anxiety, but quite a bit of that book is contained in the 90 Seconds book.
Okay, wow.
So I I actually wrote the material that relates to the 90 Seconds book. And then and there was a chapter on anxiety in that. And then I took that and expanded it and wrote the Easier Anxiety book. And then I turned around and took the material from the Easier Anxiety book and brought it back into the 90 Seconds. So it's, it has a lot, there's a little bit more on anxiety that's not in the 90 Seconds book, but I will tell you that the most important elements are there, and we've touched on a couple of them here already. And so if you want to have something to reflect on as you're watching this, this interview, then I would say reflect on these couple things around anxiety. I don't in quote, I believe in anxiety, but at the same time I don't, based on what I said earlier about believing that in general it's a distraction from the 8 unpleasant feelings. So the first thing is to consider that anxiety is like an umbrella, a cover over the 8 unpleasant feelings.
Yes.
And when you start using the word anxious or anxiety, then I'm going to challenge you to actually change that up and go, all right, what if it's not anxiety? So in essence, I'm taking the words of anxiety and fear away from you and anything that sounds like it, and you have to use just the 8 feelings to choose from. Then the challenge I'm challenging you to is to identify which one or more of the other 8 feelings you're feeling, and then to notice that once you identify it, you actually won't feel anxious. That's number one. The second thing is that I also look at anxiety as unexperienced and unexpressed feeling. And I would have you reflect on that too, because sometimes you actually can experience what's going on, but you're refusing to express what's going on, and you're refusing to express it to the person that needs to hear it the most. And my caveat around speaking is that anytime you speak up and speaking, and I will also say here that if speaking, I know I'm kind of going off a slight tangent, but if the dealing with the 8 unpleasant feelings was not the foundation of my work, then speaking up would have been. So understand just how important I think speaking up is, speaking with ease. But my caveat around this is that it is always done from a positive, kind, and well-intentioned place. It does not give you license to be malicious. It is only from a positive, kind, and well-intentioned place.
Thank you. That is a lot of food for thought, and I think a very good combination. This holds true for all your work. Very good combination of enlightenment and pragmatism. So it's very, very whole. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Rosenberg. This was incredibly insightful, and I feel excited about exploring the 8 unpleasant, uncomfortable feelings which hold the key for personal growth.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, and that's really where it's at. The method is one thing, but the real gem, the real diamond in the rough is that it's all about the 8 unpleasant feelings. So you've got that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Incredibly grateful. I'm sure our community is going to benefit from this.
Well, then stay in touch and let me
know.
Yeah,
for
please.
Sure.
Yeah. Yes. And the only thing that I can do is actually encourage you to get the book. And it's 90 Seconds to a Life You Love. In fact, if you want to go to my website, you're welcome to. There's a PDF of the Easier Anxiety book that's available for downloading for free. So if you go to drjoanrosenberg.com, then you can get that, or there's other stuff that's available there too. And I do a weekly blog as well. But it's the truth of it is that it's not. I'm encouraging you to get the book because I know what's in it and what it can do for you. It actually has nothing to do with me. So I just know. I know how much of my heart I put into it, and because I have had the chance to watch how this process has impacted lives over these decades, and it works. So I'm just encouraging you only because I know how much it can positively change your life.
Yes, and if you were to, I've seen on the website that there is an option to get the book. Would that ship to India, or what would you recommend?
You're talking about the 90 Seconds book?
Yes,
Well,
yes.
the 90 Seconds book, I think there's a website, 90secondsbook.com. But I think the thing for the 90 Seconds book is, I would say buy where you would normally buy your books. What I was talking about more specifically was the Ease Your Anxiety. And that's a PDF, and that's immediately downloadable. So,
and 90 Seconds is on Kindle too. Right?
Yeah, that was what we were talking about. In the 90, I don't know what they've done with it in India, but in the United States, they marked the Kindle version down. The book company marked it down 85%. So we're talking $4 US dollars to a $28 book. So so go figure. So go buy a bunch of Kindle books, or buy the hardcover. So it's
yeah, the hardcover. I think I'm a fan of the old-fashioned reading, which is like very palpable, and you can underline and go through it. So
So there's the U.S. version of the paperback that's coming out in this upcoming December. The paperback from England is out now, so people can get it in hardback or paperback as well. And 2 different covers, 2 different subtitles, same content.
Yes, and you're active on Twitter too. I see wonderful tweets.
Yeah,
I follow you on Twitter.
Awesome. Well, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. In fact, I just did a course on LinkedIn that I think people will really value as well. It's called Dealing with Grief, Loss, and Change. So that's actually also available on LinkedIn. So yes, I'm active on all 4 of those platforms.
Yes, wonderful. I was already following you on Twitter. I'll follow you on the other.
Please do.
Yes.
Yeah, please do. Please share.
For sure.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for taking out time on a Friday evening, our time morning, and blessing of the virtual world that we can, connect across the globe. And
True. Yeah, absolutely. You're so welcome. Thank you for your interest, and I hope it serves your audience well.
Yes, for sure. Thank you.